careful. You might get what you ask for. You just got to be really careful about the way you structure your company in this era. Fast, high valuations, fast rounds, inflated, this, that, blah, blah, blah. It only compounds the pressure later.
Tony Conrad left Danone to chase the speed, experimentation, and innovation of Silicon Valley startups. After building companies like Sphere and About.me, he became one of the most influential early-stage consumer investors behind brands like Blue Bottle, Sweetgreen, and Modern Animal at True Ventures. Today, Tony is investing at the intersection of consumer behavior, AI, and culture, backing founders building the next generation of iconic companies.
When we have a miss on a market, because a market, that's okay. I can live with that. But when we have a miss on a founder, that really upsets me. As your companies get to bigger and better scale, they demand more of your time. So I always took that responsibility incredibly seriously. I was working a lot more than most people, literally 15-hour days every day. I was dead.
Tony, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
Mike, I am good. I'm a little, as I was telling you earlier, I'm a little tired. We announced our one of our companies, Modern Animal, got acquired. And the announcement went out at 6 a.m. this morning, East Coast time. So I've been up doing stuff. But
that's
anyway,
so exciting. Congratulations on the outcome.
Thank you. I think this might be the first time I've ever done a podcast or, anything public facing on the heels of good news. So normally I'm coming from some challenging news. So it's great to be here. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad that you're tired for good news. Yes.
Yes.
Instead of it being for bad news. So that's very good. I wanted to first talk about the beginning of your career. You spent a decade inside Danone, and they're one of the most powerful consumer machines on earth. You walked away and you went into tech and tech startups. What happened?
Well, I think, so first of all, like in that time period, working for, a CPG kind of brand focused company, that was a very coveted role. It still is a coveted role, I think, for a certain type of person. But, when I was coming out of college, that was just something that everybody was kind of gunning for because it was great general management, P&L management training, brand, distribution, all that stuff. And I absolutely loved working at Danone. I never envisioned I would be working there for 10 years. In some ways, I kept kind of getting, they didn't dupe me, but I kept duping myself into it and started off in New York, and then they dangled moving to Paris, and I went there for 4 years. And then from there, I ended up running mergers and acquisitions for Southeast Asia for the company. And so, I just kept kind of teasing it out a little bit, and I kept getting more and more out of it. And so I really, really loved it. But I think it's different when you're working on something that's already at scale versus trying to work on something that is at inception of idea. And that really attracted me, right? To kind of really better understand what I was capable of. And there's no better way to kind of figure that out than to be a solopreneur for a minute and then to get into doing things that are at the ground floor. So I really wanted to move from zero. I really wanted to move closer to zero from scale, and that was really it.
Why on the tech side? Why not on like the CPG side?
Because tech is got faster iteration cycles. And I think it was just, the direct relationship that you could have with, consumers in tech is very different than kind of an arm's length relationship that you have with them. So, like if you're a brand manager of a yogurt company, you certainly are talking to consumers and trying to understand them. But you're not really interacting with them in a direct way, right? And you're reliant on a lot of third-party data, your partners, to kind of get a feel for it. And tech is just like immediate, like you see, like this thing works or it doesn't work, or, I can run a few experiments and try to get it going. And if that doesn't work, then you can just move on. And so I really love the data-driven aspects of tech, and once I got a little bit of that taste, I couldn't imagine going back. It's like texting versus snail mail. You know what I mean? And both are effective, right? And I do, I mean, I don't mean that like in a disrespectful way, but it's just like they're both very effective ways of getting to a means to an end. But the immediacy of tech was just really, really exhilarating to me, and I never stopped once I got a taste for it.
Talk to me a little bit about that era. What was it like when it came to angel investing and then also starting, and also just being around the ecosystem? How did you get involved?
Well, I've been doing this now for 25 years, almost actually getting closer to 30 years. Don't want to age myself, but it's been a while. And I think, when you get, having access to founders, in the beginning was part of the game. But then you kind of would wait around in the early days for a little bit of signal, right? And you'd kind of try to see where the idea was going. And as time has moved forward here, you're able to move. You don't have to wait, for that. It's almost too late. The way that our funds are set up is that we want to be the very first institutional capital that goes into a company, and so we're looking pre-seed, whatever is pre-seed these days. We're just trying to get involved with the right caliber of founder that is working on an interesting idea that we kind of ask ourselves, what if they were able to succeed, what does that unlock in terms of value? And so I don't think that the game hasn't really changed over time. I think that's the basic premise of what we do. It's just the time cycles have become so much more compressed. And so it pushes you even harder to get, to develop your networks, and the kind of the flywheel in your network. So you're getting absolutely the earliest access to high caliber, interesting founders as possible, right? And, if your other funds have different strategy, they want to wait until there's something that is working, and then they want to make a bet that their involvement can help hyperscale it. I'm more interested in being, and I think we as a fund are more interested in being involved in the earliest part of that cycle, because we feel like we can help impact the DNA of that company in a way that's much more significant than we can at a later stage. So anyways, I don't know if it's changed all that much. It's just those time cycles are just so much faster than they were before.
Back when you were starting angel investing and also kind of before you started your company, you just left Danone, and whereas it seems like in the San Francisco Bay Area, what was the approach to kind of get involved in the community, and actually meet founders, and how did you even think about when you were first starting on investing? What were the right founders that you actually wanted to partner with and back?
Yeah, when I was thinking about leaving Group Danone, there was a couple things kind of at play. One is I really wanted to get back home, right? And San Francisco, I grew up in Indiana, so this is not where I'm from, but figuratively speaking, I wanted to be back in the United States. And also in 1990, 1994, 95, I was using the Netscape browser out in Asia. And I was like watching Chicago Cubs, or not watching, I was like, watching on a screen Chicago Cubs baseball, and it would be like ball one. You know what I mean? Like, it was like, but
I've been there.
yeah, but it was, to me, it was like, oh my God, this is going to be amazing. And so everybody kind of knew that the Bay Area was happening, and this where the movement was. And so I decided, I wanted to get back to the U.S. It was really clear to me I wanted to live in the Bay Area because I wanted to be around this ecosystem. And thirdly, I also needed to take a year off. Like I just, I'd had my children, my two boys, while I lived in Asia. And I'd always fancied, I'm one of those odd people that at the age of 5 or 6, I'd kind of always fancied being a father. And here I had these kids, and I was just constantly on an airplane. The job I had in Asia it was a big geography to kind of cover. And so I just was never home. And I was burnt out and I needed a year off. And so I told my wife, I'm going to take a year off. And she says, good luck with that. And she was working. She's an architect. And so we moved here, and I did take that 1 year exactly to the day. But in that time frame, I started, just meeting with people, getting to know people. I didn't really know anyone in the Bay Area, and so I was just constantly networking and just, what people were up to, and eventually I started writing a couple of little checks, and so. It was a great time to be an investor in 1997, that's for sure. And you didn't have to be very skilled, and you'd probably have a good outcome. So anyways, that's how I got into it. And then, the crash happened. And I think that's such an amazing moment in the history of Silicon Valley, because it kind of showed a glimpse to the future, the speed of the future, and valuing companies in a different way, valuing what could happen, and, how could it unlock additional TAM and all that kind of stuff. But it was, well, yeah, I mean, I just think it was just a perfect moment to kind of pause and see a lot of the people. I don't know how to phrase this, is why I'm struggling a little bit, but a lot of the posers, I guess is what I'll say. A lot of people thought it was kind of quick, easy money, and those people had kind of gotten involved in tech, and they weren't really in it, I think, for the right set of reasons, which is about creating. It's about making something from nothing. Yes, it comes with great rewards, but that can't be the primary driver. And I just think the community had become overly populated with that type of, kind of professional. And so a lot of those folks kind of went back to their corporate jobs and comfort, places that were a little bit more comfortable for them. But a handful of us kind of stayed back here because we could see the data doesn't lie. And it was like every time you looked up, the stadium was getting fuller and fuller and fuller of people. And while there weren't business models, it's clear that there was traction and that it was working and there was something really interesting here. So I knew at that moment, this is what I'm doing. This is how I'm going to ride out the rest of my career. I'm going to be working around this stuff, because I knew it would work, and it eventually did work. So.
Do you think, looking at that era, that late 90s, early 2000 era, when there was a big tech crash, and there obviously was a bubble and then a crash, I know that you've been through, quite a few cycles. How do you think about this AI era? Do you think that right now there's a bubble when it comes to AI and there's going to be a crash, or going to be like a change in terms of valuations that's quite substantial?
Yeah, I think all of that. I mean, I do. Crash is a strong word here. I think
is the market frothy? I guess maybe that's a better way to say it.
For sure, and I think markets correct themselves when things get misvalued and overly valued, right? And so I think what's tricky about AI in this kind of era of new company is the TAMs on some of these companies. These foundational models are just extraordinary, and how it plays out in the application layer is to be seen. But I suspect that we'll have a lot of things in the beginning that are misvalued. And we can get into that a little bit later, when we talk about, some of the risks and pitfalls for founders in this era. But I do think there's a correction that will have to happen, in order for the models to work for everybody, right? For the founders, for the entrepreneurs, the team members, for us as investors, our LPs. I do think there has to be a correction at some point in time. So I think that's coming.
Yeah, that's fair. It's very, very fair. So how did you end up at True?
True is, I'm so glad I ended up partnering with John and Phil and Paneet and Tony and, so many of our team members here. Um, it was Phil Black and I were sharing an office. This is back in that moment when like the market had crashed. It was 2003. And he said, just come work out of my office. And I was like, okay. I'll come do that. Free office. It's great. Had a pool table. It was fun. And he asked me if I wanted to join him in the fund. He was raising a different fund at that point in time called Blacksmith Capital. And I said, no, I want to actually see if I can start a company. I feel like this is the moment, right? And so that was when I founded Sphere.
Why did you feel like that was the moment when you said that so many people were kind of going back to their corporate jobs? I understand if you went back to your corporate job, you'd be traveled around Asia or at least in the role, but was that ever on the table for you?
No, that was never on the table. That's never been on the table since that moment. Like never 1 second have I actually dreamt or thought about that. What had happened, I got a little lucky. In 2003, I invested in a company called Oddpost and founded by Ethan Diamond and Ian Lamb. And the CEO of it was my partner now here at True, Tony Schneider, who subsequently became the CEO of Automatic WordPress and was also my co-founder in another chapter in a company called Sphere, which we're going to get to here in a second. So Oddpost, though, was amazing because they were really innovating on the edge of DHTML, which is Ajax, and it's what makes the web interactive and asynchronous.
This episode is brought to you by the Hidden Gems. Let's be honest, there's a lot of bullshit in the marketing agency world. So much underdelivering, overcharging, and incompetence. You truly don't know who's good until you engage. And by then, it's too late. That's what the Hidden Gems solves for. Powered by deep agency insider knowledge, they provide founders and brand operators with only brand beloved, highly vetted boutique agencies at preferred rates. Agencies across media, creative, dev, design, events, social, and beyond. All well covered. The Hidden Gems serves brands like Dr. Squash, Monster Energy, Gorilla Mind, Figs, and Sadva to achieve some of their biggest growth. And here's the best part. David Drexler, the founder, is offering his service free forever to anyone in the Consider VC community who mentions the show. So if you're thinking about hiring an agency, talk to the Hidden Gems first. It's free service, biggest bang for your buck. You simply can't lose. Link in the show notes.
Seeing these guys develop this company with $1 million total, they were like living in a library. They were using things like a shared server, like which became cloud, obviously. Costs were really low, and they had a massive success. And I thought, wow, the cost to do these things has gone so far down that, I think I can, with $500,000, I think I can get something up and running and see if I have a good idea here. So that was really how that transition happened. At the exact same time, though, Phil and John Callahan were getting together and founding True Ventures. And they asked me if I wanted to join. And I said, I wanted to do this company and I didn't think I could do both. And they said, well, we get to write our own rules. We're starting our own fund. So why don't you join and you can do both? And I was like, well, how is that going to work? And they go, we'll figure it out. And so one of the first things that they did, which was amazing, was they moved our partner meetings to Tuesday because for both Tony and I, it felt disingenuous for us to go work on our companies and that show up on Monday morning be the first thing that we did, right? And so it just we kind of felt our way around it. And I think what we realized really quickly, Mike, was what an unfair advantage it was to be both a venture capitalist and a founder simultaneously. I guess Reid Hoffman had done that, Andreessen had done that, and a handful of others, but that wasn't a thing that most people did. And it was just like in the boardroom, we were learning so much about growth, hacks and things that were working that we could apply to our company. And, when we were just being, entrepreneurs, we were mixing with other entrepreneurs. And so deal flow was great. And it made it really, really easy to kind of do both. And so we did both until eventually we couldn't do both. Eventually you can't. Eventually that
When
breaks.
was that moment? When was that moment for you?
Is when your company works and your venture fund is working. I think honestly, that is when it breaks, and you're like, "Oh my god, I'm going to blow my brains out! Like, how am I going to do both? Like I just, I was dead. And by the way, I signed up for this, duality gig, for over a decade, because I went on to do another company as well. So
Yeah.
twice.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, talk to me a little bit about when you actually at the moment said I can no longer do true, and kind of had to focus on, not that you weren't full time, but all of your energy onto the company.
I don't think I ever got to that where like I felt like I can't do this. It was just tiring, And as your companies get to bigger and better scale, they demand more of your time, and the table stakes are much higher, and you owe it to those founders. And so I always took that responsibility incredibly seriously. It just meant that I felt like maybe I was working a lot more than most people. Probably not true, but like, at least in my head, I was just like, my God, I mean, I'm working, literally 15-hour days every day, and I got my family, and I'm going home, and I'm going to make sure I'm going to be there for dinner and bedtime, and then I'm going to pop back up on my screen, in the basement, my gluing machine in a dark basement. The optics were pretty bad, for sure.
So I know that you've obviously, you came originally from CPG. You started tech investing and investing in tech. You started two tech companies as well.
Yeah.
Why? What fascinated you about four wall and retail concepts?
Oh, I think that most people just see four walls, but I just see it as a distribution node for a brand. And if it works, it's not about the unit, or for me, it's more about what it unlocks. There's brand, there's product expansion, there's cultural relevance. And then I think if you can get to scale, one thing people don't really understand about four wall is it's incredibly highly defensible, right? The cost for somebody to get into that game are
So much capex.
extremely high.
Yeah.
It's a lot of capital, and that's kind of the knock on it. And that's why it falls out of favor in a moment like this where AI is so super scale and all that, that, it's kind of hard to justify working on four wall stuff, in this moment. But that'll change. That'll change because those same things I just said about defensibility and your ability to create very large scale businesses, is real, and that's not going to go away. It's not like physical part of our world is going to, disappear, at least in my lifetime. Maybe in yours, you're younger than me, but not in mine.
Well, okay. So one of the first four wall concepts, I believe one of the first one of the first four wall businesses that you invested in was Blue Bottle.
Yeah.
I bet it was one of the first one. What attracted you about Blue Bottle? What were some of like the early signals that you felt had the ingredients where it could actually become a business that makes sense for venture?
Yeah, it's a perfect storm. I wasn't looking for it. I was always a coffee kind of aficionado, and it was a space that I thought was interesting. I knew Blue Bottle; they'd had their one cafe here. A buddy of mine, Brian Meehan, who had founded a couple of other companies and very successful guy. He came over for dinner one night, and he, asked him what he was working on. He said, I'm working on, don't tell anyone, but there's this cafe called Blue Bottle. Do you know? And I go, yeah, of course I know it. In fact, I even know the founder. Like, he serves in the farmer's market, and I always talk to him, and extraction techniques and all this stuff, like whatever we were kind of geeking out about. And he goes, well, I think he's open to actually a venture kind of type investment. And I go, how much do you think it would be? He goes, I think we're going to need $10 million. I go, I'll do half. And I literally shook his hand. He'll tell you the same story. I just leaned forward. I go, I'll do half. And he goes, like, for real? And I go, guaranteed. So then I came back and we had a policy here at True that you have to, that you kind of have to disclose anytime you're investing over a certain amount, and in anything, just to make sure. And I think one of my partners asked me like why I thought it was interesting that I would do that. And I was like, well, oh my God, I just laid out this thesis around, there's Starbucks. There's obviously going to be an alternative to that. This is a very different kind of approach. And can they take 5 to 10% of the market cap of Starbucks? Absolutely. And for me, it was like the question I kept asking myself was, no matter any place in the world where there was a Starbucks, if you were to open a Blue Bottle or a kind of a artisanal based coffee shop across the street, how would it do? And the answer was it would do incredibly well. Would it kill Starbucks? No. But would it do incredibly well? Absolutely. And for me, that was the market sizing. I just kind of understood intuitively. And then the brand and what James, Freeman, the founder, kind of stood for was, to me, the same things you always look for in any tech investment: high conviction, a real point of view around how the entire, from the moment you walk in, what's the door handle, to getting to the point of sale, using a Square machine, having limited menu, having espresso drinks only consumed in porcelain kind of cups. Now they now do them in paper cups, but in porcelain cups at the time, on premise, because it should be consumed at a certain temperature. All this kind of stuff, this level of detail, it's just so amazing to me. And it's the same thing that you find in the best founders, period, of any probably industry, but certainly in tech. And I was just like, you know what? This is a no-brainer. The combination of Brian and him, this is let's go do this. And, we never looked back, and it became certainly one of the more notable. It's not by an order of magnitude, not the largest outcome we've ever had, but it's just a very notable brand moment for us as a firm. And still today, people think of me as Blue Bottle Tony, and I'm like, well, I've done these other things.
I know you've done a lot of other things. By the way, Modern Animal just sold too. This morning,
and
right?
then there was a Sweetgreen that we did.
Yes, of course.
And then we have another one, Madison Reed, which is massive in the hair space, and and Amy Arrett, who is a phenomenal founder, and one of our venture partners here at True as well. So, it can work
for sure. How does True invest? Meaning, when you decide that you found a company that you want to invest in on True, how does it actually work? Do you need other partner buy-in, or how much independence do you actually have in terms of making the bet?
I think you have a lot of independence to make the final decision. You do not have carte blanche independence to run the traps on, is this a good idea? What are the pros and cons of doing it all by yourself in a little silo and then go make that decision? That doesn't work for us. I think what we want to do is free us up to have healthy discussion, right? And to depersonalize it, so we can just talk about the merits of a deal or a space or a founder in a way that's much more authentic. But ultimately, each one of us is experienced enough and has hopefully kind of earned the right to be able to make the call, right? It's like being the head coach at the end. On each deal, you're kind of like the head coach. You assemble a bunch of players, you go off, you diligence it, you do all the work, you figure out whatever. You're open to listening to different kind of plays, but ultimately you got to make the call. And so that's what the kind of culture that we've tried to create here, and not second guessing each other, right? And I've had deals where people are just like, oh, please don't do that. And, by the way, I should have probably listened on most of those cases. But a couple of times I've had deals, and I won't tell you which ones, but where I was just like, you know what, I'm going to make the call. I'm going to make it, and I'm going to do it. It's worked out just fine,
Do you think in some ways it's an advantage of being in multi-categories beyond just software businesses?
Yeah, massive, massive. I mean, this would be great. I mean, there's thesis investors out there, which I'm not one of them, that we could sit here with, and we could probably have a great debate on that, right? How, your understanding of a space compounds really quickly the more that you're in it. And I do believe in that. Like, I do believe I could go pull a trigger on another coffee investment, and I don't want to, and I'm not going to, because I don't want to diminish what we accomplished with Blue Bottle. But like, I think I could be successful again in that space? Absolutely, because like I understand it. But I do think that for a fund, I love that we have a bunch of contrarian bets in lots of different categories, everything from biology to, we have massive unicorn companies and at the intersection of biology and AI, stuff that I have no clue about, right? And thankfully we have partners that do. Rohit and Adam and Paneet, and Paneet does all kinds of stuff in security. He's done, like, he did Duo Security, and they did Vesa. Vesa just had a $1.6 billion exit. It's just like, there is real value in that, but not for, if all of us were just security folks, or biology folks, I think we'd be missing out on a broader set of opportunities that are quite interesting and can be real fun makers for us.
This episode is brought to you by the Hidden Gems. Let's be honest, there's a lot of bullshit in the marketing agency world. So much underdelivering, overcharging, and incompetence. You truly don't know who's good until you engage. And by then, it's too late. That's what the Hidden Gems solves for. Powered by deep agency insider knowledge, they provide founders and brand operators with only brand beloved, highly vetted boutique agencies at preferred rates. Agencies across media, creative, dev, design, events, social, and beyond. All well covered. The Hidden Gems serves brands like Dr. Squash, Monster Energy, Gorilla Mind, Figs, and Sadhva to achieve some of their biggest growth. And here's the best part. David Drexler, the founder, is offering his service free forever to anyone in the consumer VC community who mentions the show. So if you're thinking about hiring an agency, talk to the Hidden Gems first. It's free service, biggest bang for your buck. You simply can't lose. Link in the show notes. How do you think about, because I know you also have an extraordinary angel investment portfolio. How do you think about what makes sense from an angel investment perspective, like Flower and Water and Trick Dog, versus, fund investments like Blue Bottle, Sweetgreen? What's actually different? And do you know, when you talk to a founder and if you're interested in the company, which bucket something kind of goes into?
I do. And we try not to do a lot of personal investing, right? Especially anything that can be around the edges. And as we've done things like Blue Bottle and these things, it makes it harder and harder to find a kind of unique edge out there. Mm-hmm. So over time, I've done less so. But I think on the personal basis, for me, it's about taste driven. They're often smaller, sometimes non-scalable ideas, but they're things, and they're people I want to back. They're people that I can turn a very modest amount of capital into a 3x, or maybe a 4x, 5x in a reasonable time frame. And it's great, and it's fantastic. On the fund level, there needs to be a path. You got to really believe on every investment you make that if things went right, you got a few lucky breaks, and you got the right team, the right founders as protagonists, that you could return the entire fund. Like in each one of our funds, we're now on our 8th fund. We've always had a company, well, let's just go through the first 4 funds, which are the mature funds. We've always had a company that does that returns the entire fund, right? And so you have to have a real nuanced understanding of the different buckets there.
I know it all depends about check size and that sort of thing, but when you underrate, I know if thing goes right, as you say, it has to return the whole fund. Does that mean like a 10x return, for example, based on the portfolio, or maybe based on the actual company specifically, or is that upwards?
I think it's upwards. I think it's 25x and above.
25x. So it has to. So you're underwriting. If everything goes right and you have a couple of lucky breaks, so you can get a 25x on that
We have
return on that investment.
We have investments where we've made 75x.
Yeah, yeah, that's amazing.
Literally.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
That's extraordinary.
It's extraordinary, right? But you got to really push for that. You got to make sure, you know. And by the way, like when we've got it wrong, which is most of the time, right? I mean, that's the nature of this. Most of the time, you're kind of. I mean, we even have lower batting average than probably, the like low end of a baseball, professional baseball player. You know what I mean? But when you get it right, it's just so crazy good. And when it doesn't go right, there's two things that, well, one thing is inexcusable to me to get wrong, which is the founder that we back. And, that is the thing where we need to over-index and make sure that we're getting the right founder. Now, obviously, we don't get 100%. Yeah, we have misses there too. But when that happens, when we have a miss on a founder, that bothers me. Like that really upsets me. When we have a miss on a market because the market didn't develop or kind of become something that we didn't, it didn't become what we envisioned that it might be able to become. That's okay. Like, that's okay. That's just, you just, there's a Y in the road and you just ended up on the wrong side of it. And that's okay. And execution, that's okay too. Like if you miss execute, it's a bummer, especially when that market is real and you just miss executed. That is a bummer, but I can live with that. But I can't live with it when we get the founder wrong. It just that to me is like, that's basic 101 stuff that we got to get right.
How do you know if you have the wrong founder?
Well, how do you know if you have the right founder? Let's talk about that.
All right.
Now I'm like my mother.
Let's keep it positive. Let's keep it positive.
You know why I'm an optimist, right? This is why I do what I do. I like it when a founder is not rushed, does not think of this as a game, is incredibly thoughtful as we are about working with them, as they are about working with us. Like, I like a founder that asks questions. And it's always a telltale for me at the end of a pitch if they actually ask any questions. If they don't ask, you can't tell you how many times people don't ask questions. And I may have even liked the idea up until that point in time and the founder, but then they didn't ask any questions and it gnaws on me. And I've learned that that's a pattern recognition moment. Like, you got to ask questions. Like, otherwise, they're not going to ask the right questions to their partners, to prospective employees, teammates, all kinds of stuff, right? They're just going to be so in their own head. They're not going to be curious about what makes you tick. And so I like that. I like a founder that understands storytelling. I mean, and not like a fictional story, but like help me understand your narrative. Like, I'm really interested in like the humanity of all of this. Like, who's the human behind, the name? And, sometimes I'll walk into and you'll have a founder that's maybe less experienced or nervous or whatever, and they'll have their presentation up, on the screen by the time you walk in, and they're ready to just kind of jump into it. And I'm just like, let's just spend 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Let's just talk. Not about the Chicago Cubs, but let's talk about like who are you? Like, tell me a little bit about you so I can understand, the journey that you've been on, how you ended up sitting across the table from me. And I also like to share that back, in a much more cryptic way, but, I like to share that back so I don't want to waste their time, right? This is their show, not my show. But I do want to share a little bit about that. So that's it. That's how I know if we got the right founders or not.
How, in this age where it seems like some categories like AI, for example, are moving super quick and founders are raising so much money, and things are just going really quick and maybe they kind of have to be rushed in a lot of senses. What's your view on that when it comes to talking with founders if they have to move really quickly?
You have to work You have to move in a calculated way.
Mm.
So you do have to have a certain cadence to the way that you process, and you kind of the decisions that you make and the moves that you make. Um, my partner John Callahan's a pilot, and John, by the way, is one of the top venture capitalists in the world. We don't talk about it because we don't publish our data, but I know the data, and John is exceptional. And he always says, "No quick hands" is one of the first things they teach you as a pilot. And so when you're up there and something goes wrong in your aircraft, you gotta like process very quickly. But at the same time, you just can't helter
Panic.
skelter. You just yeah, panic, right? And so you really need to do that. You need people that are going to move um, with a strategy in place and tactics, but in a very calculated way. And I think that what we see is that you know like certain things like fast high valuations, fast rounds, inflated, this, that, blah, blah, blah. It only compounds the pressure later, right? And it shows up. It's harder to do follow-on rounds. There's less room to grow into the story. It's misaligned expectations. It's just all this stuff. And I've been seeing this now for 30 years. And it's hard in a moment like this in particular where like, yeah, you got an idea. Let me value it at $50 million. Well, like, be careful. You might get what you ask for. Like, and founders, if you're that one founder, and every founder thinks they're that one, right? Unicorn, where like, damn it, I should not have given away 20% of my business early on for $5 million, right? Or even worse. It's like, I, seriously, just slow down and like structure your business in a way that is smart and creates an opportunity for you to be able to capitalize that company with the right people at the right valuations that make sense, right? That create an opportunity for you to have exits later, or to eventually become a sustainable, public, standing company. Like all that stuff is really important to get right. And in this moment, I think most people are getting that wrong. I really do. And that's not being self-serving. Like I go back to my own companies, Sphere and About.me. Like I was an accomplished person already in the community. I could have named valuations much higher on Sphere than I did. I could have certainly, when I did About.me, I could have named kind of whatever I wanted in terms of valuation because it's a success of Sphere and the stuff that we were doing with WordPress and Automatic and Matt and Tony, right? Like, but I didn't. Like I valued my company at $5 million. I took,
Wow.
I took 20% dilution for $1 million. Like I didn't need to do that. I could have taken 5% dilution, but I'm glad I did because it presented itself. There was an early opportunity to have a great exit that was accretive to all of us and meaningful to my co-founders and team members. And we were in a position where we could go do that, right? And feel great about it. And so you just got to be really careful about the way you structure your company in this era.
No, totally. I mean, I've heard you on past shows say that founders should resist overheating their early valuations. And, I know that you obviously, as you mentioned, you priced your own last company very modestly. And when you could have gone higher. Talk to me about like what seed is currently at. And because it seems like it's pretty inflated. And if that's the case, how do you compete?
It is inflated for sure, and there's lots of things where we're going to be disciplined, and we're not going to succumb to the pressure. But luckily, because of our reputation and our performance, in the marketplace, we have an amazing flywheel of founders that we've worked with in the past who either go on to create new companies and they want to come back and work with us, or they're sending us, team members that spun out of their successful company, right? And so those type of founders, I think, are the ones that we're working with. I think they're a little savvier in a lot of ways, and they're over-indexing on getting the right partner at this stage because it changes everything. If you get the wrong partner at this stage, your world is going to suck. I can't say it any better. I've just been on too many boards where I've seen the wrong type of investment partner come. And I always say, like, thankfully we're there because we can help protect the cultural DNA of the company. We can make sure that we buy. I mean, we have so many crazy stories, Mike. Like companies that have gone public where the growth investors wanted to throw the founder CEO who got us to that spot, overboard, like 6 months, 9 months before they went public. Like just crazy, crazy stories where we've had to say, like, we're not voting for that. No way. They have earned the right to take this thing public. Like, we're going to go all the way. Like, so there's just a lot of behavior out there that I think people are, they want their people in, like I want my people in to run this. And I think like that you just have to be careful about as a founder to make sure that you're getting the right partners around the table. So I think we're able to get our deals still. We've never had a median ownership under 20% in any of our funds.
Well, at what point does it make sense to oust the founder? What do they have to do?
Certainly, if there's anything fraudulent, where we've had that. We've had founders that are not collaborative and are hiding. They're not transparent. They're not open about what's not working and what is working is easy, but what is not working. Just like in life, there's certain people that know how to manage up, but they don't know how to manage laterally or down. And so they're really good managing their board, but then we'll start to hear horror stories about how they're interacting with their executive leadership team, or the culture is toxic, those kinds of things. Those are areas where I think it's not so much like ousting, but it's evolving, moving away from a founder, like.
This episode is brought to you by the Hidden Gems. Let's be honest, there's a lot of bullshit in the marketing agency world. So much underdelivering, overcharging, and incompetence. You truly don't know who's good until you engage. And by then, it's too late. That's what the Hidden Gems solves for. Powered by deep agency insider knowledge, they provide founders and brand operators with only brand beloved, highly vetted boutique agencies at preferred rates. Agencies across media, creative, dev, design, events, social, and beyond. All well covered. The Hidden Gems serves brands like Dr. Squash, Monster Energy, Gorilla Mind, Figs, and Sadva to achieve some of their biggest growth. And here's the best part. David Drexler, the founder, is offering his service free forever to anyone in the consumer VC community who mentions the show. So if you're thinking about hiring an agency, talk to the Hidden Gems first. It's free service, biggest bang for your buck. You simply can't lose. Link in the show notes.
I mean, I'm still of the school of belief that there's never a scenario in which a company benefits by not having its original founder or founders involved in the company. That may be an advisory role, it might be in a board role, it might be an operating role. There's all kinds of different ways that can happen. That doesn't mean that they're CEO, and that's okay. Like I will line up on that if I think it's the right decision for the company. But rarely does that come to that. Most of the time, I think that the founders that we're working with, and why I say selecting the right people that you want to work with, and then convincing them to want to work with you, is that they're going to have a lot of self-awareness. The type of founder that we like working with, and they're going to know even before I do most of the time that it's time for them to maybe step aside. And I would say in over 80% of the cases when somebody has stepped away from being, or when we have made a change in things I've been involved with, where we've made a change at the CEO level, they've been driving that or co-driving that with us, right? As opposed to us kind of like, hey, this is not going to be a good day. We're going to sit down and have a tough conversation with you, right? That almost never really happens, But to be clear, it has happened. I've been doing this for 30 years, and yes, there's a handful of people out there that probably, if they were listening to this, go like, well, wait, that wasn't my case, But that's not the norm here.
How do you think, though, balancing that with your fiduciary responsibility of with LPs and obviously investors to obviously get the highest return on your investment?
I think if all you're trying to do is get the highest return on your investment through hardcore execution, that's going to present problems later. We without naming any of these companies, I'm sure there's like 5 that just flash in front of your mind where we know these kind of CEOs that just drove, and then everybody kind of knew, everybody swept it under the rug because they're executing really, really well, and there's a massive price to pay, down the road. And so I think that's not a healthy company. That's not a good company. And so you either pay the price now or you pay the price later, in those situations.
That's fair. That's fair. I want to talk a little bit about .me.
Yeah.
You've described about.me as a capital efficient win. You've had 2 exits, a loyal user base, even if it didn't quite become the identity layer of the web that it was supposed to. What did that outcome teach you about how founders should define winning for themselves?
I'm proud of the work that we did at about.me. And as you noted, we did have a very successful outcome, bought it back, then had another successful outcome.
Which is so rare. I mean,
it's
unbelievable.
So rare. Yeah, it is rare. And we're lucky that happened. Or maybe we were skilled in making that happen. Hopefully a little bit of both. But I felt like it was a colossal failure for a bunch of different reasons. One is I shouldn't have sold it the first time, even though we had a great outcome, because it was way too young and it wasn't ready. And, AOL bought it. AOL was fantastic. I have nothing but nice things to say about AOL, Tim Armstrong, their team there. Like they over-delivered everything, from what we expected. But the reality was it wasn't even a year old. And it wasn't ready for that. It needed more time to become.
Why did they buy it?
Well, because I think Tim had built the revenue business at Google on the ad side. And then he became, very high profile CEO, for AOL. AOL still had juice. It had a lot of assets and a lot of potential. And, he came in, and I think he looked around and he's like, okay, I've got a bunch of legacy business here that are good, but I got to find my iPod. And I need to take some shots on goal. And so I was, they had also bought Sphere. And so I was leaving as he was coming in. And I think he said, hey, but you're the kind of person I need to have here. And I'm like, but Tim, I want to go start another business. And I've stayed longer than, my lockup. I was above board here. He's like, well, how about you be an advisor to me into AOL? And I'm like, okay. Sure. And so we just stayed close. And then just kind of over the course of that year of kind of working on this idea, he just loved it. He totally grokked it and loved it. And I really liked him and respected him. And so he made us an offer. And it's one of those moments where, for me, that offer, it was meaningful because it was like second time success. So from that, but the financial rewards of it, I didn't need those, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but I just did not need those. I had enough money already at that point. But I had co-founders and I had team members and other people that this was going to be their first exit and it was meaningful to them. And so I just felt like, let's do it. And so I kind of talked myself into it a little bit.
Yeah.
I still think the premise, somebody out there, I wish if I had more energy, I'd go do it again. Because I think the way that we learn about each other. We're just kind of outsourcing our identity to Google. And who knows, AI, I guess, here in the future, but we're just really outsourcing it. And I don't know, if anybody's listening to this, I don't Google myself every day. So probably, in fact, I don't think I ever Google myself. I have no idea what might come up. But you really you want to control that narrative of how you see yourself. And by the way, I don't think of LinkedIn as I love Reed in that team there. But that's my professional identity. That's not who I am as a holistic person. And Facebook was kind of in that era, was like, that's my social, and that's my social graph, and all that kind of stuff. And that's also doesn't cover the professional side. And so About.me was just like this little simple idea that you could put it in your email signature, put it in your Twitter bio, put it wherever you are on the web, and people who are curious, like, oh, who's Tony Conrad? They click on that, and shoot, there's a picture of me, and here's a little bit about me, and here's all the links to the things where you can find me on the web. And that's it. And I just think that idea is still relevant today. So somebody go out there and do it. And then we had the name About.me, which was amazing to have that name, So that's why.
For sure. Thank you so much for explaining it, and also the premise and the thesis that you had, that you still don't, you still think there's an opportunity there in terms of building something for it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just think your identity is so much broader than any one of these social kind of vertical, channels that we're in.
I know you're a generalist investor. I know we talked a lot about your consumer portfolio, which I really do appreciate you talking about it. Over the years, consumer has kind of constantly been out of favor, at least the past few years. What's your view? And do you feel like you're spending more time looking at B2B versus consumer?
I am right this second. So consumer may go in and out of favor with investors, but it never goes out of favor with consumers. Right? Like literally. So, pause on that. And then you're like, oh, okay, consumer has this, twisted relationship with tech where it kind of comes and it goes and it comes and it goes. Right now, though, we're clearly in a platform shift, to AI. In fact, that shift has already happened now. It's not even happening. Where I think the infrastructure layer and the tool layer is the most interesting here in the beginning. But soon it will be the application layer, both on the enterprise side and on the consumer side. And what we do know is that if you look historically in any of these, big waves, the the application layer is about 10x the value of the infrastructure layer. So there's a lot of amazing outcomes that will happen, around applications. But right now, I think it's important for us to double down on some of the bigger kind of infrastructure type problems, security being foremost in our mind right now. And the entire stack, as we all know, it's boring. Anybody who's listening is like, yeah, I already know that, dude. Like the entire stack is being rewritten. And so, there's just incredible opportunities out there. And so that's what we're a little bit focused on. Now, we have three investments, or I have three investments that, on behalf of True, that I've kind of co-sponsored or sponsored, that I'm very excited about, that start to, I think, they're kind of like prosumer business. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of people hate that word, and I kind of hate that word, but it's the best way to describe it. So there's a company called Atos, another one called Pulsia. Both these companies, oddly enough, are chasing the same idea, which is using AI as your co-founder, right? And, it's kind of the idea is you click once, give a few prompts, and you go to bed and you wake up in the morning, you got a company. And then that company, all the ops around it, the infrastructure stuff, all the marketing, consumer acquisition, videos, ads, all that stuff is just being created by the agents. And these companies are growing incredibly fast. So Atos and Polcia are the two that are both. They're coming at it slightly different angles, but they're both attacking kind of the same area. We can talk a little bit about how that happens because we don't typically
we'd love to.
Two bets
Yeah.
in the same space. And then the other one is Nectar Social, which
I know Mizpah well. She's great.
And Mizpah and Farah are wow. Ex Meta. They know all this social stuff incredibly well. And if you think about like websites being the consumer engine, the DMs are now where the consumer is, consumers making decisions, right, and interacting. And so Nectar Social is, I think all three of these companies are going to be monster-sized companies, and they all have great, Henrik and Nicholas at Autos, Ben, who's a solopreneur at Polcia, and Ms. Benvera. They're just all fantastic founders to work with. So, anyways, I think we're starting to move closer to this maybe consumer application area.
So why are you able to make two bets in the same space?
Well, we invested in one of the companies. I won't go into the total history here, but this happens sometimes where you invest in a space, you invest in a company. It's really clear, company A, going after that idea that I just described. And you invest in something that's over here and really not at all there, but they're working on some different stuff, and they kind of pivot a little bit and pivot a little bit more and pivot a little bit more. And the next thing you know, like, oh, you wake up and you got two companies in the exact same space. And that's what happened in this particular case. And so, it's a little tricky, but luckily, all of those founders understand, that nothing was done intentionally. And now we've got these, we've got these companies in our portfolio, and our job is to be as supportive to both of them as possible, right? And to have great guardrails around, no sharing of information and all that kind of different stuff. So, it's working out. I think it's always tricky. You just gotta be an open dialogue, and on our end, we have to not overreact. I think if I was in their like seat, I'd be a little bit upset, right? And I'd want to understand. But once I think I understood what happened or how that happened, then I'd be okay with it. Like, it'd be like, okay, I got it. Like, let's move forward here. This is not what we should focus on. Focus on our own company and go for it.
This episode is brought to you by the Hidden Gems. Let's be honest, there's a lot of bullshit in the marketing agency world. So much underdelivering, overcharging, and incompetence. You truly don't know who's good until you engage. And by then, it's too late. That's what the Hidden Gems solves for. Powered by deep agency insider knowledge, they provide founders and brand operators with only brand beloved, highly vetted boutique agencies at preferred rates. Agencies across media, creative, dev, design, events, social, and beyond. All well covered. The Hidden Gems serves brands like Dr. Squash, Monster Energy, Gorilla Mind, Figs, and Sadva to achieve some of their biggest growth. And here's the best part. David Drexler, the founder, is offering his service free forever to anyone in the consumer VC community who mentions the show. So if you're thinking about hiring an agency, talk to the Hidden Gems first. It's free service, biggest bang for your buck. You simply can't lose. Link in the show notes. Yeah, well, I mean, it's great that you're being upfront with it, by the way. I mean, you're saying it here even publicly, so that's really impressive.
I will say it because, it sucks. It does suck. It sucks for me. It sucks for, it sucks on one level. But once again, any fund of our size, we have, $4 billion under management, like, you're just going to have things that end up overlapping. It's just the reality, I remember there's been lots of times where we did not invest in things because
being so concerned that it would be overlapping.
Well, we knew it was overlapping, and yet there were big outcomes. Like, so, when I was on the board of Automatic and WordPress, we did not invest in Tumblr, and we could have. you know.
Wow. Oh, that's
There's
interesting.
just there's things like that out there because it was so clear to us that that was whatever. It turns out that Tumblr and WordPress are kind of very different
Very
animals.
different. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
in the time, it felt like they were the exact same thing, you know. And I know Andreessen had some stuff, around Instagram and some other company, and they think yeah, I can't remember what happened, but I think they kind of had a falling out with the Instagram guys, and so they ended up having a stronger relationship with the other company. That other company went out of business, and Instagram, we all know, had a fabulous success. So, you know, I think it's best if you can just avoid getting to we're going to detonate the nuclear option here. There's a reason we're all working well together, and these hiccups happen, and it's part of life, and so you just move on.
Totally. What's your view on mega funds? Have they been really hard to compete with?
Yeah, yeah. I think more money you have, the sloppier you're going to be on valuations and rigor, and I also think, like, in some of these mega funds, buyer beware. You take what feels like maybe, what feels to me like a very large round now, 15, $20 million, and you're taking it from one of these mega funds, but um, doesn't mean you're going to get the attention because it's such a small amount of their capital, right? And and so as soon as your idea isn't working that hard, they're just going to focus on other things, and that's not the way we work. So we want to be here for all the iterations of it, because once you finally get to the kind of promised land, that's what's rewarding. You understand
Yeah.
all of that. It it's just it's messy, it's murky, all the M words. It's all that, and then when you get there, you're like, yeah. Like on a day like today with Modern Animal, I mean, that's not a straight line by any stretch of the imagination, but it is a very successful straight line at the end.
Yeah. I mean, I know you're also in Slack with Stewart, just
Yeah,
seeing
yeah.
how he's been a couple of times too, and the monster that
Oh my
obviously he
gosh,
built with Slack.
Stewart's amazing. I mean, he did that twice where he pivoted. And there's a good example, he's working on both times. He's working on gaming companies, and one he ends up being a internal messaging system, and the other he ends up being a annotated photo app, company.
Yeah,
Like, these are really different ideas that evolved out of these other projects he was working on. And I'll bet you might have had some overlap. His investors might have had some overlap with other companies. That happens.
totally, totally. What's one book that's inspired you personally, and one book that's inspired you professionally?
Oh my goodness. I don't think we can go with one. I'm going to take two get personal.
Love it, love it.
So, In Praise of Shadows is
Mm,
absolutely probably my favorite book of all time. It's a very easy 100 page kind of ish read. Perfect for me. I have trouble reading, so it's just amazing. But it's about design. It's about, kind of early 20th century Japan. And it's just incredible book. And Tony Fadell, who invented the iPod and the iPhone and Nest and a few other things. He had recommended it to me years ago, and I'm so thankful that he did. I've read that book. I'll bet you I've read that book 50 times. And then Shackleton's Journey to me is the most mind-bending story of leadership ever written. I don't know if you know that story, but
yeah, I'm actually currently reading it.
are you really? Okay,
I'm like,
great, man.
I'm like halfway through. Yeah, yeah.
I would just hear it's a little bit of a spoiler alert, but you can handle it. We all kind of know that they all
Yes,
every single person
Every single person survives,
survives.
which is unbelievable.
Every single person, 100% survived. The most gnarly, like, expedition that you could ever imagine. But I can't remember. You'll get to the end of this book. I think it's within 3 years, over 50% of them, once they're back in England and wherever they go to, they die. Over 50%. Alcoholism, drug abuse, scurvy, all kinds of different things, right? But it's like the human capacity to persevere with a set of really incremental goals, like really modest incremental goals, and just day by day to get through it a little bit, just get through it, just get closer, get closer, get closer. You know, you know, once they get there, then they fall apart, when they get home. And that part is sad, but to me, the leadership that it took is crazy. And it's just an amazing story, as you're.
No, for sure. I hearing about how he's done. I mean, just what I find amazing was just how he manages people. In terms of he should have this person, for example, be by his side because he thinks that this person would disrupt the rest of the group because he's like kind of negative, just all these managing all these different personalities on top of obviously getting people out to survive the whole thing. It's really incredible.
I'm going to Antarctica in November, and I cannot wait. So I probably will reread this book.
Oh my gosh! Report back. Oh my gosh!
I'll send you some photos. But
Please.
On the professional, the innovator's dilemma, I think if you're in this business, is still the best lens on disruption, how disruption actually happens and why it happens. I think that's an amazing book. And then one that I'll just throw an extra one in here just for fun is Andrew Sorkin, who I have tremendous respect for. Wrote a book called 1929. And
I just read that.
Yeah. And I think that's just so fascinating to me. And I think the parallels with, I'm not saying that there's going to be a depression so I want to put big asterisks on that. But I do think there are a lot of interesting parallels here, right, with what we're experiencing. And it's about, at that point in time, the residential investor could get very easy, interest-free, not interest-free, but, low interest, loans and get leverage, right? And so, it allowed a whole generation of retail investors to kind of come in that weren't accredited investors. And so that's why we have a lot of the rules that we have today. But the most fascinating thing about that, Mike, was when you understand the things that kind of pulled us out of the Depression. One of the key things was at the end of, I think the Secretary of Commerce or whatever, had this thesis that he wrote up that we should move from a 6-day work week to a 5-day work week. And you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But why that works is that the thesis was that it would create a whole cottage industry, but a large cottage industry around hospitality and travel and all that. And it worked. It literally worked, because when you went to a 5-day work week, it meant on Friday night you could leave and you could still go to church on Sunday. But when you were working, Saturday afternoon and you got only Sunday off, you're going to church. Like, there was no travel, there was no hotel industry. I mean, to note. And so I'm kind of wondering, every time reason why I like that book, why I think it's instructive for us. I know there's a lot of panic about job loss, and by the way, I have that same job. I have that same panic, and I think that's real. And I think there is going to be like a bad moment for us. But I also believe in humanity's ability to problem solve and to kind of figure out unsuspecting ways to get through things. Shackleton's journey, and I think this idea around travel. And so I don't know what will happen in the age of AI. But I'm optimistic that it will work itself out.
Yeah, that's fair. That was such a great book. I actually got it for Christmas, and I just couldn't put it down. I just kept reading it, and I'm actually not. I actually don't really read a lot. My wife is really like the reader in the family. She reads like 160 books a year. I read like, gosh, I don't read that many books a year, but I couldn't put it down. And then would also listen to like audiobook and stuff like that in the car, and just loved it. Loved it.
It's amazing. I mean, I lug that book. I got it at Christmas too, and I lugged that book to New Zealand. And that thing is, that's a hefty book to lug around. But I did. I finished it.
That's amazing. That's amazing. That's awesome. That's awesome. Tony, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Likewise, I know my answers are never that crisp, but hopefully the narrative
They're wonderful.
helps everybody to kind of frame their own perspective from this. So great. Thank you so much.